8:20 p.m. Off the coast of Long Island, southeast of New York. After a series of technical mishaps and unforeseen complications, over 200 passengers finally got to enjoy their journey aboard the world's largest passenger aircraft. Nevertheless, just a few minutes later, the investigation into the aviation disaster is the most complex and costly in U.S. history.
Living in the Long Island area, where the missile testing was going on, saw one or two missiles.
The National Transportation Safety Board is spinning like a yo-yo. The appearance of a mysterious suitcase. The traces of the missile. Where will the ultimate answer be? At 17 o'clock on July 17, 1996, at John F. Kennedy International Airport, USA, the flight with the code TWA 800 of Trans World Airlines has completed all standard procedures for a journey lasting over 7 hours to Charles de Gaulle Airport, the capital of France, and the final stop is in Rome, Italy. The flight is operated by a Boeing 747, a variant of the Boeing 747 known as the Robos. Renowned for its large capacity and impressive long-range flying capabilities, it has accumulated a total of 93,303 flight hours with 16,869 takeoffs and landings to date. This aircraft is equipped with 4 RAS fanjet engines and utilizes the GT9D7R system. Although, if you only look at its exterior, the design of the Boeing 747-131 still appears modern and fresh. However, with an aircraft that has been in service for 25 years, signs of aging have begun to appear. Immediately after landing in Athens, Greece, the engineers had to carry out maintenance and replace engine number 3 due to issues related to cable and thrust reverser problems. Additionally, during the refueling process, the volume control, VATO, is believed to have self-activated before the tank was full to continue this process. A TWA mechanic had to manually reset the volume control and spill control valve. After nearly 3 hours, the fuel tanks in the wing of the aircraft were filled with jet fuel ZA in preparation for the flight to Paris. This was because the flight to Paris fell within the Boeing 747's maximum range, and the largest fuel tanks in the fuselage were empty. There were only about 170 liters of fuel remaining in the bottom from the previous flight. According to the original schedule, the expected departure time for the flight was 7 o'clock p.m. However, due to an unattended piece of luggage that was loaded onto the aircraft without an identified owner, the flight attendants had to spend a significant amount of time addressing this issue. This was due to concerns related to security. Furthermore, an airport servicing vehicle broke down right behind the aircraft, leaving no space for it to be pushed back from the gate. The extended waiting period left the passengers feeling extremely frustrated and dissatisfied. Due to the characteristic summer weather in the northeastern United States, with temperatures reaching nearly 30 degrees Celsius, 2 out of the 4 aircraft engines were activated to provide sufficient power for the air conditioning system. This was done to ensure passenger comfort in tropical conditions. To simplify, when aircraft engines are activated, they generate thrust to move the aircraft. However, during this process, a significant amount of heat energy is also produced. The aircraft's air conditioning system uses this heat energy to cool the air in the cockpit and cabin. However, when the aircraft remains on the ground for an extended period, this heat can raise the temperature inside the fuel storage compartments. Some of the fuel in these compartments may vaporize and create a potentially flammable gas mixture. This can lead to dangerous consequences. Stay tuned for further updates on the development of this situation. Returning to the cabin, with the addition of one passenger who was just located, there is now a total of 212 passengers on board the aircraft. The majority of them are US citizens. Additionally, there are 40 French citizens and a few passengers with other nationalities, such as Italian and Israeli. Among the passengers, there are 16 students and 5 individuals accompanying them from the French Language Club at Monroeville High School in Pennsylvania. Furthermore, notable individuals on the plane include the famous American composer David Hobin and the French pole vault athlete Michael Bray-Job. Today's flight is being operated by a crew of 18 members, consisting of 14 flight attendants and 4 pilots responsible for the cockpit. The first officer is Ralph G. Kevorkian, aged 58, an experienced pilot. He has previously served in the United States Air Force and has accumulated a total of 18,700 flight hours. Among these, 5,400 hours were flown on Boeing 747 aircraft. The first officer is Stephen E. Snyder, 57 years old, an experienced pilot. He has previously served in the United States Air Force and has accumulated a total of 17,200 flight hours. Among these, 4,700 hours were flown on Boeing 747 aircraft. The flight engineer is Richard Campbell, 63 years old, who has served TWA for 35 years. In addition, there is also an intern in the position of flight engineer, Oliver Crick. At 8:02, after a delay of over 1 hour, the aircraft received clearance for takeoff from gate number 27 and used runway 22R for the takeoff procedure. At 8:04, engines number 1, 2, and 4 were started. Approximately 10 minutes later, at 8:14, when engine number 3 had successfully started, the aircraft officially began taxiing on the runway and initiated the takeoff process. After takeoff, everything proceeded completely normally. The pilots completed the standard checklist and were being guided by ATC, Air Traffic Control, to make altitude and heading changes to climb to their planned cruising altitude. The colossal aircraft then turned eastward and followed along the coast of Long Island. It's worth noting that this is an area where the US Navy military ships and fighter jets operate actively. Consequently, civilian aircraft must adhere to strict flying procedures to avoid violating restricted airspace.
TWA 800, this is New York. Climb to an altitude of 11,000 feet.
TWA 800, this is a call from Boston Center.
Please climb to an altitude of 13,000 feet and maintain this altitude.
TWA 800, what's your rate of climb?
Confirmed, climbing to and maintaining 13,000 feet.
TWA 800, what is your current rate of climb?
We are climbing at a rate of 2,000 feet per minute, currently at 10,000 feet and continuing to climb.
Accelerating out of 10,000.
TWA 800, confirmed, our target altitude is 19,000 feet. We will advise when reaching 15,000 feet.
Understood. We will get back in touch when we reach 15,000 feet.
At this time, the area had light winds and scattered clouds, coupled with the darkness of the night, which slightly affected the visibility for the pilots. At 8:26, the flight crew received an important warning from the ground station.
We will temporarily level off at 13,000 feet and maintain. There is another flight in the area, to the right, 7 miles south, currently flying at an altitude 1,000 feet above us, identified as B1.900.
15 minutes after takeoff, at 2029, the aircraft began to experience unusual phenomena. It suddenly exhibited signs of turbulence, and cabin lights were flickering intermittently. In the cockpit, the captain also appeared to have noticed something unusual.
Look at the fuel gauge for engine number 4. What's happening to it?
At that moment, the fuel gauge was behaving erratically, constantly fluctuating back and forth. However, this didn't capture the crew's attention for too long, as it quickly returned to normal operation, and they continued to receive signals from ATC.
TWA 800, climb and maintain 15,000 feet.
Confirmed. Passing 13,000 feet, climbing to 15,000 feet.
And little did anyone suspect that this would be the final communication with the flight and air traffic control. Approximately 40 seconds after the call, as the aircraft was approaching an altitude of 13,800 feet, a loud explosion rocked the Boeing 747. Within 5 seconds, the entire nose of the aircraft, including the cockpit, upper deck, and some of the first rows of seats in the cabin, had bent and separated from the fuselage. Sharp debris, shattered glass, and luggage were thrown in all directions, impacting unfortunate passengers. More than 70% of them were sucked out and catapulted into the air before plummeting along with debris into the water below. The remaining survivors were not any luckier, as the intense flames erupted from the fuel tank, immediately engulfing them. Losing the front portion of the aircraft, which was approximately 36 tons lighter, shifted the center of gravity toward the tail along with the 2 wings. The stabilizers and engines remained intact, causing it to surge upwards. Smoke billowed out, creating a thick gray sky. The aircraft was ascending rapidly, but lift was gradually diminishing. It started losing speed, and the left wing began an uncontrollable descent at 193 kilometers/. The colossal Boeing 747 executed a spiraling nosedive, tearing off the front of the aircraft, and debris scattered all around, resulting in significant damage and fatalities. In an instant, the aircraft, weighing over 300 tons and carrying 230 people, was reduced to nothing but scattered debris in the dark and cold waters of the Atlantic Ocean. Although the entire incident, from the initial explosion to impact with the water, lasted no more than 54 seconds, the Boeing 747's tragedy was witnessed by hundreds of people in the central areas of Manhattan, along the Connecticut coastline, and many other aircraft flying simultaneously, including the captain of Ituan Airlines Flight 07, heading northeast at an altitude of 16,000 feet, in the direction of TWA 800's flight path.
ATT, this is 507. We are 103 miles from John F. Kennedy Airport. We have witnessed an explosion of some sort and then saw 2 fireballs falling into the sea. Confirmed, 507. We have received your report. It was just to your left, about 5 miles. Indeed, that was an explosion. Thank you very much for your report 009. Contact New York on frequency 125.7, 507, frequency 133.05. Have a great day. TWA 800, this is Boston. TWA 800, this is Boston. TWA, if you read, please respond.
From the far end of the line, no response signals were received at 8:50 p.m., and a notification regarding the incident involving TWA Flight 800 was broadcast. After the accident off Long Island, search and recovery operations were immediately initiated by federal, state, and local agencies, along with support from government contractors, vessels, and professional dive teams. Remote-controlled sonar equipment and laser scanning devices were used to assist in this process. Within a few days, bodies were recovered and sent for examination to ensure the recovery of all 10 bodies. United States Navy divers also located 95% of the aircraft wreckage, including the cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder, within a week thereafter. Due to the seriousness of the incident, the FBI launched a criminal investigation simultaneously with the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, investigation into the information regarding an aircraft explosion and crash into the sea. This information quickly spread across the internet with numerous hypotheses and differing assessments. So the question remains, what is the ultimate answer? A 4-year journey, following the trail of disaster. The first question that arose was whether there was any involvement of terrorist elements or not. On the FBI's side, from the outset, they considered the possibility of this being an act of terrorism. The reason for this suspicion was that the tragedy occurred just 2 days before the opening ceremony of the Summer Olympics in Atlantic. Similar events had occurred on PNAM flight in 1988 when a passenger brought a bomb in their luggage onto the plane, resulting in the deaths of 259 people. This hypothesis became even more convincing when investigators discovered that TWA Flight 800 had departed late due to waiting for a passenger. This passenger had checked luggage but did not board the plane until being found an hour later. Furthermore, John F. Kennedy Airport had long been a hot spot and a frequent target of insurgents. At this time, all suspicions were focused on the most notorious Pakistani terrorist figure at that time, Ramzi Youssef. At the same time as TWA Flight 800, Ramzi Youssef and his accomplices were being tried in a federal court in New York for masterminding the 1993 World Trade Center bombing using 600 kilograms of explosives. He was also the individual who had placed a time bomb on Philippine Airlines Flight 400 in 1994, resulting in 1 fatality. However, due to the lack of subsequent evidence, suspicions regarding terrorism on Flight 800 gradually faded away. People wondered that at such a high altitude, if the plane just exploded, broke apart, and fell within seconds, there must have been the involvement of a far more advanced and significantly dangerous type of weapon. Therefore, the second hypothesis was put forward that the plane was accidentally shot down by a U.S. Navy warship. More than 600 witnesses claimed to have seen an unusual streak of smoke before the explosion occurred. Some even managed to capture photos as evidence and sent them to investigative agencies. Since then, unverified information has spread widely on social media, and rumors have continued to escalate. This forced the NTSB and FBI to open various investigations, revolving around a hypothesis that a missile from a U.S. Navy ship may have shot down TWA Flight 800. As mentioned earlier, Long Island is an area where U.S. Navy military vessels and fighter aircraft operate extensively. At the time of the accident, the FBI had information that there were 8 warships, 8 submarines, and 5 fighter aircraft within a 550 kilometers radius of the crash area. An early warning aircraft, the P-3B Orion, and a submarine were conducting exercises at that time. However, through the FBI's investigation into the history of military activities in the area, no missiles were found to have been fired, and the streak of smoke resembling a missile in the eyewitness photos was confirmed to be a smudge on a film roll.
living in the Long Island area where the missile testing was going on, saw one or two missiles rising in the air.
However, the saga continued as it was reignited by former White House press secretary of President John Kennedy, Pierre Salinger, who claimed to have evidence that the U.S. Navy had shot down TWA 800 and that the government was covering it up. He presented a tape recording of a radar screen showing an unidentified object approaching TWA 800 before it crashed. At this point, all eyes turned to the guided missile cruiser U.S. Normandy, and the FBI once again reviewed the records of this Ticonderoga-class warship's activities. The investigation revealed that the ship was operating at least 160 kilometers away from the crash site, well beyond the missile range the ship carried. The radar imagery presented by Salinger as evidence was also analyzed by scientists, and they ultimately determined that the signal of the object presumed to be a missile was merely radar clutter or a radar echo from another nearby flight, Z-Express 18. As a result, this hypothesis was also ruled out. Since then, the FBI decided to collaborate with the NTSB to continue the investigation process. Through the analysis of the aircraft's black boxes, experts discovered that their data abruptly ceased at 8:31 p.m. At the end of the audio recording, there was a loud noise, a sign that something unexpected had happened to TWA Flight 800, catching the crew off guard. Investigators concluded that there were many details that could have caused the explosion of the Boeing 747, such as technical malfunctions, sudden loss of pressure, a bomb explosion, or simply a fuel tank explosion. FBI and NTSB began to pursue various lines of investigation. On the FBI's side, they early on found signs of explosive residue on the wreckage of TWA 800, including PX and PATN, both of which are highly powerful explosives. PATN, along with nitroglycerin, is the type of explosive that terrorist Ramzi Youssef had used to bomb a Philippine Airlines flight in 1994. However, shortly after that, the FBI concluded that the signs of the substances found on TWA 800 did not originate from a bomb, but were, in fact, from a recent airport security training exercise. While conducting a bomb-sniffing dog training exercise on a Mach 747, Green City police officer Louis used two types of chemicals, RSX and patina, placed in fake suitcases, and one of them had ruptured, causing a leak on the outside. As for the NTSB, they organized a team of 30 workers who worked continuously for 4 months to meticulously reconstruct the aircraft's fuselage at a warehouse on Long Island. After extensive research, materials expert Jim-Wee Lee determined the location of the explosion to be in the center fuel tank between the two wings, based on the discovery of unusual dents. Returning to around 5:00 p.m. on that day, when the Boeing 747 was being refueled, as previously mentioned, a large quantity of JP5 ZE fuel was being pumped into tanks on both wings. Meanwhile, the fuselage tank of the aircraft was not being replenished and only had residual fuel from the previous flight. However, because the engines were running to support the cooling system at maximum capacity, it caused these fuel tanks to heat up. Although JP5 ZE fuel has properties that make it difficult to ignite under natural conditions, when confined, heated, and vaporized, it becomes highly flammable. From there, the NTSB and scientists at the FAA, Federal Aviation Administration, conducted tests on an actual Boeing 747, simulating the conditions that TWA 800 had experienced before it exploded in midair. The test involved pumping 189 liters of fuel into the fuel tank, attaching sensors to allow the aircraft to be exposed to sunlight for 2 hours, and finally taking off with all the parameters and runway configuration matching those of TWA 800. The results of the test showed that when the aircraft reached an altitude of 13,800 feet, the same altitude at which TWA 800 had exploded, investigators determined that the temperature inside the fuel tank had increased to 53 degrees Celsius. This was 17 degrees Celsius higher than the ignition flashpoint threshold of JP5 fuel. So what is the source that generates a spark causing the fire? Investigator Robert Swem of the NTSB stated that he discovered that the wiring system for the fuel sensor was bundled together with other wires for the cabin lighting system. These large bundles of wires were arranged along the floor of the aircraft. By reviewing the wiring systems of other 747s of the same age as the TWA 800 Boeing, he noticed that most of these wire bundles were frayed, the rubber insulation was cracked, and some even had exposed copper wires that were taped up. From this, Swem concluded that high voltage might have been transferred to low voltage and entered the fuel tank, causing a short circuit and sparking. The results of this analysis and research played a significant role in identifying the ultimate cause of the TWA 800 flight accident. That is indeed the phenomenon of a short circuit. Investigators have returned with findings from the cockpit voice recorder, CVR, audio transcript, and flight data from the site data recorder, SDR. Upon further examination, they discovered that just moments before the audio recording ceased, sound waves indicated two very brief power interruptions, each lasting only 2 microseconds. Although brief, these interruptions were sufficient to establish that the electrical source experienced sudden disruptions, causing the CVR to momentarily halt its recording. This was notably evident as cabin lights flickered just prior to the explosion. After more than 4 years of investigation and an expenditure of $40 million, on August 23, 2000, the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, released its final conclusion regarding the tragedy of TWA Flight 800. The probable cause of the TWA 800 flight accident was determined to be an explosion in the center wing fuel tank, triggered by a short-circuit event. Following the accident, Boeing implemented an inerting system inside the fuel tanks of their aircraft to minimize the risk of fuel ignition. Instead of profound gratitude, on July 14, 2004, an international memorial for TWA Flight 800 was dedicated in Speed Boy County Park in Kelly, New York. The event saw the participation of President Bill Clinton. The memorial grounds include various trees and flags representing the 13 nations whose citizens were victims of the accident. Furthermore, the memorial features a granite statue with one side bearing engraved names and the other side depicting 230 seagulls soaring freely over a vast expanse of ocean.